Hello and welcome to the third program in the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's Yiddish Culture Series. My name is Thorin Tritter. I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. Our Yiddish Culture Series explores the culture of the Yiddish-speaking world, the culture that flourished in Central and Eastern Europe from the 18th century up through the early years of the 20th century. While the Holocaust destroyed much of that world, the culture lived on through survivors and through immigrants who managed to escape Nazi-controlled Europe or who came to the United States in the years and decades before the Nazis' rise to power. Our Yiddish Culture Series seeks to draw attention to that culture, to the ways it was sustained here in the United States, and to the ways the culture of the Yiddish-speaking world reshaped America. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to take the opportunity to just share some advertisements about some other upcoming virtual programs that we have planned. So tomorrow at 11 a.m., I hope you will be interested in joining me for my next Curator's Corner, a series of weekly short programs that explore individual objects in our museum's collection. My program this week is going to focus on a piece of artwork created by Marietta Grunbaum, one of the 15,000 children who passed through the ghetto and camp at Theresienstadt. I'll talk about her painting, her experience during the Holocaust, and some of the broader background and context for Theresienstadt. In 2 weeks' time, on Tuesday, September 29th, at 6 p.m., we will be hosting a virtual conversation and discussion with the silver artist Michael Gallmer about his sculpture, The Tears of the Holocaust. And on Thursday, October 1st at 6 p.m., in one of several programs that we're holding to mark Hispanic Heritage Month, Christina Chavarria, a staff member of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., will present a program entitled The Latin American Response to the Holocaust, the examples of the Dominican Republic and Mexico. As always, you can find details about these programs and all our programs under the events tab on our website at www.hmtcli.org. Okay, let's talk about our program today. Today, we are honored to have Linda Burghardt speaking about the golden age of the Catskills, perhaps the most well-known playground and summer retreat for the Yiddish-speaking and Jewish residents of the Northeast in the post-war period. As she will explain, this one resort area reshaped the American experience, helped Americanize Holocaust survivors, and profoundly changed American culture. I should add here that our program with Linda Burghardt is funded in part by Humanities New York, with support for the National Endowment for the Humanities. We are grateful for their help in making this program possible. I also want to invite you to pose any questions you have during the program by using the Q&A tab that you should be able to find by scrolling your mouse over the top or bottom of the screen. So if you type in your questions, we will make sure to have time for Linda to respond to them at the end of the program. Okay, with those logistical issues out of the way, let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Linda Burghardt, who is a journalist, an author, and I'm pleased to say the scholar in residence at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. She holds a PhD from LIU Post and is the daughter of Holocaust survivors from Vienna, making her connection to the Holocaust Memorial a personal one. Her career has included working as a freelance reporter for the New York Times for 20 years, and she is also the author of 3 nonfiction books and numerous articles and essays that have been published in newspapers across the US and overseas. She has lectured widely to both national and international audiences, and we're honored to hear her speak today about love, laughter, and latkes, the golden age of the Catskills. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Thorin. So let's see, am I up there? I see you and I'm there. Okay, so I'll share my screen and that should all work, right? All right, let's go into here. And one more click and that should do it. Okay, so Thorin, I see you on the screen. Am I there too? Okay, so Thorin, you're there, but I don't see my screen. Should I?
I see your screen.
Oh, you do? You see my PowerPoint, and is my picture there?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I don't see it. I see yours, but that's very nice too. Okay, good. So then I guess we're ready to start. So thank you for the introduction, and I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you about the golden age of the Catskills. So in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, if you were Jewish and a New Yorker, summer vacation meant one thing. So it meant going to the mountains. And not the Adirondacks, not the Poconos, not the Alleghenies. Those were all beautiful, yes, of course, but they were not the mountains. So the mountains were the Catskills, just 90 miles north and west of the city, and dotted with bungalow colonies that looked a lot like this. And also friendly inns, resorts, and lodges that were very similar to this one. And the lavish and magnificent resorts, the sumptuous lakeside resorts that the area was best known for. So I'm sure many of these look familiar to you in one way or another. So these beloved mountains had their own special pet names among the New Yorkers who summered there. The Borscht Belt, of course, everybody knows it as the Borscht Belt, but also the Jewish Alps, and my favorite, the sour cream Sierras. So, but whatever you call them, they had so much to satisfy. So they had beautiful vistas, they had dancing till dawn, A-list entertainment, and food, food, food. But they had one more thing that made it all a success. They had other Jews, plenty of other Jews. And this was the secret ingredient. Jewish vacationers who came together as friends, as couples, in groups, in families, and sometimes even extended families with children, grandparents, cousins, aunts, and uncles. And because of this, these legendary mountains offered a vital but hidden reward, and that was acceptance, safety, and above all, a welcome sense of belonging. So this was especially true for one particular group who went there, and these were Holocaust survivors. They not only found a place where they fit in and felt secure and were accepted, but for many of them, a vacation in the Catskills was the start of the long process of learning to become Americans. So how did this legendary place get started, and why did it succeed? Well, ironically, these golden Jewish summer communities in the Catskills had their roots in an unlikely source, and that was, of all things, anti-Semitism. So let's begin at the beginning of the story of the Catskills, the geography that put them in exactly the right place to overcome this adversity and to develop into a beloved summer haven. So the Grand Catskill Mountains are spread over 3 counties, Sullivan, Ulster, and Orange counties in upstate New York, in an area of about 6,000 square miles. You can see the grayish area in the map here where the Catskills are located, just above the pink lower Hudson Valley section. And this will show you how close the Catskills are to New York City, just an hour and a half away. So the Catskills are a beautiful area, as many of you know, of course. They have rugged pine-covered peaks on their western side and the wide blue Hudson on the east. Many lakes dot the valleys and colorful wildflowers, particularly ox-eye daisies, which are especially lovely with their bright yellow centers. These grow wild over the meadows that surround the cities of Liberty, Monticello, and Ellenville. These are the 3 major towns in the area. So the Catskills were named for the Dutch. They were named by the Dutch, who arrived in the 17th century. And the hardy Dutch settlers found numerous mountain lions called catamounts there in the Catskills. That's where the cat part of the name comes from, and many creeks. So kill means creek in Dutch, and thus the Catskills. So by the late 1930s, when the golden age began to flourish, the cats were gone, but the mountains still loomed majestically, and the 6 rivers, now the Neversink and the Esopus are the most famous. The 6 rivers offered swimming, fishing, canoeing, and all manner of water sports and relaxation to adventurous vacationers. But in the early days, vacationers weren't always welcome there, especially Jewish ones. And this sentiment was made quite clear. While most people rightly associate the Catskills with Jewish culture, Jews were not originally accepted at all. The mountains had been a resort area for Gentiles in the 19th century, and some hotels put up signs like these or additional ones that said no dogs, no Negroes, no Hebrews. But change was coming. Historically, about 2.3 million Jews, mostly from Eastern Europe, emigrated to the US between 1880 and 1924. And in 1924 is when restrictive legislation halted the flow. And more than half of those people chose to settle in New York City. And some came from big cities like Lodz, Warsaw, and Odessa, but most came from small towns or shtetls. Many of them had been farmers in the old country and wanted to reestablish their bucolic lives in America, because for many, farming was the only thing they knew how to do. They needed and enjoyed some very welcome help that they received from the Jewish Agricultural Society, which was ready to aid them, and most took advantage of the help. And because of the proximity to New York City and the cheap land, the lower Catskills were very attractive. But most of the Jews did not become farmers. Most of them settled in the city itself. And to their urban peers, and as their urban peers became more prosperous, they looked to do something they could never have imagined doing in the old country, and that was to take a vacation. Since the Jewish farmers weren't especially welcome in most of what was still an anti-Semitic area, and they were not so successful at working the land, the rocky land in any case, many of them opened their farmhouses to guests, and they opened them up to Jewish guests. And they did this basically to make money, and they began taking in boarders. What they found over time was that the soil was not so good, working the land was hard, and they soon stopped farming altogether. It was much nicer to have people staying in their houses and having their income come from that. So these boarding houses ultimately morphed into small hotels and bungalow colonies that were originally clusters of outbuildings on their land. And thus the Borscht Belt was born in Sullivan County, sometimes called Solomon County. And by the late 1930s, and the region was on the road to becoming established as a Jewish resort area, a place where Jews could feel at home. Easy transportation from New York City had a hand in making the Catskills so popular. Early on, regularly scheduled trains brought passengers to the mountains. The one on Friday night was called the Husband Train. And by 1950, 500,000 eager city dwellers flocked there every summer. So soon the new affordability of cars and the building of highways had an even greater impact as cars and buses quickly replaced the railroads as the premier people movers. The creation of the New York State Thruway, Interstate 87, built between 1954 and 1960, helped speed vacationers through the Hudson Valley to their hotels and bungalow destinations. Many of us remember stopping at the Red Apple Rest, located on Route 17 in Southfields, for a couple of their famous hot dogs on the way north. And then also on the way back, making a stop at Oryx on the other side of the road on the way home from the Borscht Belt. But where did the name Borscht Belt actually come from? So borscht, for those of you who have never tried it, is a soup of Ukrainian origin made from beetroot as its main ingredient, which gives it its deep reddish purple color. It's a very distinctive looking soup. Borscht was popular in many Central and Eastern European countries as well, and it was brought to the Catskills by the Ashkenazi, Jewish, and Slavic immigrants to the US. It's still a popular dish there today. And the Catskill area was dubbed the Borscht Belt as a nod to the Eastern Europeans' roots, and the name stuck, of course. It's a cute name, it's gonna stick. But the famous Borscht Belt is not the only renowned area in the country. As they say, in the South and Southwest, it's the Sun Belt, and then there's the Rust Belt and the Frost Belt, and the Jello Belt, and even the so-called unchurched belt, whatever that is. But up here in New York, for people in the know, it's of course the Borscht Belt. So who were the people who first spent their vacations in the Borscht Belt, and why did they come? Well, there is a multitude of answers, and we will try to get to all of them. So to start, according to the Catskill Institute, and this is a well-respected organization that studies the history and culture of the area, the rich mountain experience was enjoyed by over 1 million visitors during its peak in the late 1950s. Now that's double the number of vacationers who came just a decade before. And vacationers had their choice of over 1,000 lodges, inns, restaurants, lodges, inns, resorts, and hotels that were operating at one time, plus the many bungalow colonies. So one of the first large hotels in the Catskills to become Jewish was the Shawanga Lodge, pronounced in Yiddish, Shavanga, which opened when a group of businessmen purchased the hotel from its Christian owners. Shavanga was a lively place with a racy reputation, and people laughingly called it the Schwengel Lodge, which is a play on the Yiddish word for pregnant. Virtually all the visitors to the Shavanga Lodge and the hundreds of other accommodations in the Borscht Belt, especially in the early days, were middle and working class Jewish New Yorkers, mostly Ashkenazi immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe, traveling with their children, sometimes grandchildren, sometimes parents, and even sometimes grandparents. And often it was the first vacation that they were able to take. The family finally had the status and the income to be able to take time off from work. They came seeking relief from the heat and crowding of the Lower East Side, the South Bronx, Brooklyn. They came by the thousands from Flatbush, the Grand Concourse, Flushing, Jackson Heights, Rego Park, Forest Hills, Washington Heights. Their origins were from all over: Hungary, Galicia, Russia, Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Germany, and Austria. And all were seeking an all-Jewish in-group environment where they could transport the rich fabric of their lives in the city or also the culture of their old hometowns in Europe to a lively country setting. The vacationers were hungry for mountain air. They were hungry for good food and for the American way of leisure. What did they find in the Catskills? Everything they were looking for: entertainment, camaraderie, relaxation, and a great deal of comedy. The Catskills at the time, it was an enclave set apart from the restrictive and the often unfriendly Gentile environment in other resort areas. And the Catskills became quickly a mecca for Jews in need of a holiday, and the vacationers quickly learned to create a resort world of their own. So romance sometimes flourished in the hotels and resorts, and parents often brought their young adult kids to introduce to each other, just as they did in Temple, hoping they would find a nice Jewish spouse. So the living was easy, the air was clean, and no one would hate them for being Jewish. What's more, they could complain and be understood. There was always a lot to do: swimming, sunbathing, boating, mountain climbing, even trout fishing for those who wanted a challenge. There was croquet and tennis, pinochle, poker, mahjong on the porch, on the lawn, and outside under the trees. Handball, softball, and basketball, even shopping from itinerant peddlers who came with their wares. They went from hotel to bungalow colony to resort, offering everything you can imagine: clothing, tools, books, kitchen equipment, dresses, swimsuits, men's shirts, toys for the kids. So comedy clubs and entertainment filled the evenings, and day camps took care of the kids so the adults could play. And the most important activity, waiting for the next meal. But the Hamish atmosphere in the Borscht Belt was especially important for one particular group of visitors: for Holocaust survivors, recent immigrants to the US from the darkness of Hitler's Europe. The sun-drenched Catskills had a special meaning beyond all the activities that were designed to please the ordinary vacationers. It was a place where survivors in their new homeland, could mix easily with other Jews. They could socialize and be Jewish together. They could form friendships, learn to laugh at American jokes, find out about the Yankees and the Brooklyn Dodgers, discover the best schools for their kids, how the stock market worked. They could find out what neighborhoods to live in and which ones to avoid. Simply put, the survivors could get help from other Jews who had come to the US before them, recently before them, or generations before them, and in this way become Americanized. So to this group of vacationers, the little bungalows and the lavish resorts offered something deeply precious: the chance to heal. The survivors who traveled the 90 miles from New York City came with burdens they thought they would never shed. Many had spent years, as we know, in unimaginable pain. Many had suffered losses of enormous magnitude. Now, here in the pretty mountains, in the fresh air and the warm, accepting surroundings, They had the chance to find freedom from the deadly anti-Semitism that had tortured them, plus a community of connection to others with similar fates and a deep sense of understanding. And for those American vacationers who had not endured the Holocaust in Europe, but perhaps had lost relatives who had stayed behind in the old country, they had the chance to gain a deeper understanding of actually what had happened in Europe. So what were survivors in particular looking for after the war? So for many, the answer was a way to understand their new homeland, to develop their English skills, to forge a new identity, and to repair their broken spirits. Many survivors thought they would never laugh again, but this was impossible in the Catskills. This was utterly impossible. So it was Mel Brooks who said, yes, the bonds of shared pain are strong, but here's what I know. The bonds of shared laughter are even stronger. So comedy, without a doubt, was the heart and soul of the Borscht Belt. There was so much entertainment there that the area was called the Las Vegas of the mountains. A long string of resorts, from large to small, from small to large, and everything in between, hosted some of the greatest performers of the era. The Catskills were a virtual college for comedians, and it soon became a laboratory for modern comedy. As Alan King put it, let me tell you, I knew the Borscht Belt better than anyone, and the Borscht Belt was always synonymous with laughter. So many of the Jews who went to the Catskills had been displaced, persecuted, and excluded for so much of their lives that a particular style of comedy developed that reflected many of the underlying unspoken truths of their lives. And they never got tired of listening to it. Night after night, they packed the nightclubs. Look at how full this is. Much of the comedy was based on quick-witted, rapid-fire one-liners that were often self-deprecating. This is very typical Jewish humor. For example, when Jackie Mason showed up one night with a large glittering ring on his finger, and the hotel owner asked, "Is that a diamond?" Mason smirked. "No," he said, "it's a Jewish name tag." Everyone was fair game for mockery. Even ethnic slurs were common at the time. I got a friend. He's half Italian, half Jewish. If he can't buy it wholesale, he steals it. That's one of Buddy Hackett's. And my best friend is this guy. He's half German, half Polish. He hates Jews, but he can't remember why. So careers were made on the stages of the legendary Catskills, and nearly every Jewish comic of the time performed at one of the area's hotspots. A-list comics such as Rodney Dangerfield and Hannah Youngman, along with Woody Allen, Milton Berle, and Don Rickles, honed their craft in the Catskills as they topped the charts and drew guests into the hotel's full-fledged, beautifully decorated theaters and lavish nightclubs. Vacationers laughed with Phyllis Diller and Toady Fields, Sid Caesar, Jerry Lewis, Buddy Hackett, the multi-talented Danny Kaye, and hundreds more, all entertainers whose careers developed in the Catskills and became legendary. And the list goes on. Of course, you know Carol Channing and Jerry Stiller, Zero Mostel, Eddie Cantor, Joan Rivers. They all got their start in the Catskills. And the Borscht Belt became the proving ground for their acts. Succeed or fail, it all happened in the Catskills. And ultimately, the region would become known as the place where stand-up comedy was born. We take it for granted today, but it didn't exist before the Catskills, before the Golden Age. So at the height of the Borscht Belt, more than 600 resorts offered one or more shows on any given Saturday night, and a large portion had performances nightly. It was a chore deciding which one you're going to go to. Here are the incomparable Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet. Nearly every popular entertainer between 1940 and 1970 either got their start in the Catskills or played there or both. So interestingly, the jokes were invariably clean, told without swear words, unlike today. There was neither cursing nor vulgarity in the comedy acts. Jokes were told in English, but with Yiddish words and idioms sprinkled in, and sometimes with a Yiddish punchline for emphasis. Everyone understood it, of course. Multi-award winner Carl Reiner, who performed at every large resort in the Catskills, once explained his view of comedy. Humor is just another defense of the universe. And if you're hurt by the world, you internalize it and you spit it out as comedy. The performers in the Borscht Belt were made famous for a style of comedy that defined much of American Jewish culture at the time. The men on the stage routinely poked fun at the women in their lives, but generally in a good-natured way. Let's listen to Don Rickles. A thief stole my credit cards, but I won't be reporting it. The thief spends less than my wife. And I've been in love with the same woman for 49 years. If my wife ever finds out, she'll kill me. The long list of comics who entertained the vacationers honed their trade in the Catskills, and the piece of Jewish history that made up the Borscht Belt survives mostly in the comedy that is found today in other places. So today's Jewish comedians, such as Judy Gold, you know her from stage and screen and TV, the irrepressible Larry David, who everybody seems to have a comment on, and the ever popular Jerry Seinfeld reflect the Catskills' influence on what makes us laugh in the 21st century. With nightclubs offering first-rate entertainment every night at the resorts and throughout the Borscht Belt, and vacationers ready to listen, musicians of all kinds and levels were attracted to the venues. High-class performers such as Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Dean Martin entertained guests, and hotels vied with each other for the top entertainers. Sometimes the ensembles switched their style and sang songs from the old country until there wasn't a dry eye in the place. And then they would start the dancing. Many guests danced the night away in lavish ballrooms. Latin beat, cha-cha, rumba, mambo, everything you could think of, the live bands were able to play and willing to play. And this was especially true at the grand resorts at the top of the price line during the golden age of the Catskills. You've no doubt heard of them all. These include the Concord, Grossinger's, Kutsher's, the Nevele, and the Browns Hotel, and a handful of others. And because of their outsized influence on the reputation of the region, each one deserves a recollection of a bit of history, and we'll do that in a moment. But first, I'd like to tell you about the unique sets of accommodations offered in the Borscht Belt, each one with a different influence on the culture that developed there, along with an idea of the people who chose them over the big resorts. The existence of a wide choice of different kinds of accommodations is part of what made the Borscht Belt unique. There was a place there for pretty much every economic level, so that every New York Jew who wanted to go could find a way to afford it. So while the area is best remembered for extravagance, more is better became the Catskills slogan, the area also played host to Jewish vacationers along the whole economic spectrum. And while vacationers would go to the fancy resorts in the evening for entertainment, most spent their days and nights at hotels and bungalows that better and more easily fit their wallets. Overall, there were 4 levels of lodging. At the lower end of the economic scale were those small rooms called in Yiddish the kuchalaynes. These were rooms that were located in boarding houses and offered shared kitchen privileges for all the guests. They were economical, perhaps not the most comfortable, but popular and often surprisingly beloved nevertheless. Now, kuchalayn in Yiddish means cook alone. And this referred to the fact that the people who rented the rooms in these boarding houses did not get their meals from the house owner, but did their own cooking, which greatly reduced the price of the accommodations. But kuchalayn was an ironic name, since the boarders who cooked there shared everything in the kitchen and rarely got to cook alone. Could be kuchalayn, could be kuchalayn. It depends on the type of Yiddish that you're speaking. Nevertheless, many guests were happy with the arrangement, and they didn't have to pay the house owner for food, and they didn't have to buy prepared meals, and they could make the dishes they and their families liked the best. Another type of accommodation that was very popular was the rental bungalow, in which the family would have the whole house, usually 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a small kitchen. Only a very few actually came with a living room, but many had a porch. And over the years, the bungalows were upgraded and they became more comfortable and also more functional. So clusters of these rentals formed the ubiquitous bungalow colony that we hear so much about. It's one of the most sought after types of lodging in the Catskills, and one that is recalled with great affection today by those who spent their childhood there. There are even Facebook groups about the bungalow colonies in the 50s and 60s, and even some in the 70s that you can join and communicate with some people who stayed there. So the bungalow colonies were casual, but they had a very specific culture. No dressing up was required, for example, and many described themselves as very homelike. So bungalow rentals would come with lawn chairs, gliders, picnic tables, and clotheslines, all of which were shared. And during the week, they were downright matriarchal, ruled by the women who stayed there with their children. And on the weekends, when the husband train came up, the balance shifted and the husbands came up and it was party time. So here is the typical layout of the colony. There would generally be a centrally located social hall, and sometimes it would be called the casino, where the renters would gather for bingo, for movie nights, and afternoon dress-up parades for the kids. There would be joint dinners, talent shows, masquerades, roller skating, and homemade music in these casinos, with the pool in the middle of the bungalow colony and bungalows all around it. In the mid-50s, at the height of the region's popularity, there were over 2,000 of these bungalow colonies in the Catskill area. So each colony also ran a day camp for the kids. So parents had time during the day to play cards, to plan meals, to argue, to smoke and swim, and do whatever it was they wanted. Very peaceful. So the day camps were very popular and would run all summer, all day from 9 to 4, or approximately. The kids often went home for lunch for the full 8 weeks of the summer. And most families rented the bungalows for the whole summer, so the kids had plenty of time to form friendships, some of which still thrive today. So camps typically had about 50 or 75 kids, although some were larger. The counselors were usually high school students, some local, some who had come up with their parents, some who had been campers themselves as younger children, and they ran arts and crafts programs in the social hall, and they taught the children softball and basketball and other sports. So staff members, of course, would look forward to their days off. And where did they go? So one place they went was the Cass Inn in Margaretville. They went to the Indoor Arcade in Monticello. They went to Katz's Deli nearby in Monticello. They enjoyed coffee cake from Katz's Bakery in Liberty. And some were even seen devouring roast pork sandwiches at Poppins in South Fallsburg. So for vacationers who wanted 3 meals a day prepared by a kitchen staff instead of one of the family members, the place to go was not the bungalow colonies, but one of the string of hotels, inns, and lodges that popped up all across the Borscht Belt as the level of influence increased, a level of affluence increased among the Jews of New York City. So virtually all the hotels served only kosher food, and to the extent that the kosher kitchens allowed, they also offered Chinese and Italian menus on special occasions. So most depended on staples like herring, brisket, and latkes, shav. So what is that? Here is shav, green borscht or sorrel soup. They served noodle pudding, regular borscht and sour cream. They were always popular. And of course, so was prune juice. So food, as you may have noticed, played an outsized role in the Catskills. Hotels were expected to serve huge kosher style or kosher, order whatever you want meals around the clock. A small number of hotels, however, broke with the pack and served what they called Jewish American cuisine. And this was not really kosher. It was kosher style. And this allowed guests to have lox and eggs for breakfast and lobster for dinner. And this became very popular. Still, most of the hotels still stuck to the kosher menu. So often these hotels would advertise themselves as hotels of refinement and remind people about the dietary laws, but not necessarily enforce them themselves. So meals at the pricey hotels were always included with the cost of the room. And this is an early example of the Club Med model, known today as the all-inclusive vacation. At some hotels with a generous kitchen, like Brickman's, for example, you could order a touch of everything for the table. Here is a Brickman's breakfast menu, and some patrons, if they preferred, would do this, a chance to taste it all, a touch of everything, as a way to order every single item from the menu for, say, breakfast, and sample a bit of each dish, just because you could, and you could find out what maybe you wanted tomorrow, and you had a little bit of it today. So roast chicken was, of course, a dinner staple that everyone loved, though at the Concord, where attempts were made to elevate everything, roast chicken was called roast Philadelphia capon with pan gravy. Lunch was often dairy, and the Borscht Belt standby was listed on the menu at Grossinger's as smoked salmon with cream cheese salad. Make it sound a little fancier. So even though 3 large meals a day were standard, food vendors from outside still visited the hotels to provide a little something extra. For example, there was the Chow Chow Cup. This was an early food truck that sold chicken chow mein, egg rolls, and Chinese hot dogs. And then there was the Knish man from Mountaindale, who came around on Thursday afternoons with brisket, latkes, soup, kishka, Holland, and knishes, both potato and kasha. Something for everyone. And not to forget Shimmy the Pickle King, who brought tasty, salty snacks that the kids especially loved. So without a doubt, the Catskills had always provided a special draw for Jews in need of a holiday. But as tastes became more sophisticated and the larger hotels developed into the famous resorts that distinguish the region, the level of amusement and entertainment soared. Stars from Broadway, TV, and Hollywood performed at the Concord, and this was the largest of the extravagant resorts, a hotel with 1,500 guest rooms and a dining room that seated, this is amazing, 3,000 people at one time. Imagine the staff. Interestingly, the Concord was founded by a Russian Jewish immigrant, a man named Arthur Winnerig, who came to the US as a child and made a fortune in hair tonic and cosmetics. So he bought a small hotel in the 1930s, put in an enormous pool, and built the hotel into what would become the most well-known resort in the Catskills. This is the history of the Concord. Surprisingly simple start and surprisingly lavish development. So Buster Crabbe, an Olympic swimmer and TV and film star, was the swimming director. Though it is said that more patrons lounged on the waterside chairs watching his gorgeous physique than worked on perfecting their side stroke in the pool. So everything in the Concord was designed for pleasure, and sometimes even the kids enjoyed the nighttime fun for their own enjoyment and that of their parents. And everything was big. Even the nightclub names were grandiose. The Ali Baba Room, the Persian Room, the Imperial Room, the Playhouse of the Stars. There were dancing classes and 2 orchestras playing in the ballroom every night, and the festivities went on until dawn. The Concord's main competitor was Grossinger's, an enormous resort complex with 35 buildings, complete with its own airstrip and its own post office. The hotel served 150,000 guests a year in its heyday. Eddie Fisher worked there as a boat boy in his teens, and he came back to marry Debbie Reynolds in the 50s, which we all remember, I'm sure. Now, it's hard to imagine that Jenny Grossinger, the queen of the resort that bore her family name throughout her lifetime, had arrived in Ellis Island from Galicia as a penniless little girl in 1900 and moved with her parents to Sullivan County to a farm in 1912. Over the next 6 decades, Jenny supervised the family business from what began as a boarding house to the magnificent 1,200-acre complex that it became. So the Grossinger family believed in celebrity culture, excuse me, and they offered sports figures and other stars free vacations at the hotel. A nearby competitor, Kuchalaynes Hotel and Country Club, the longest running of the Borscht Belt hotels, quickly followed suit, becoming known as a sports mecca when legendary Boston Celtics coach Red Auerbach stayed there. Wilt Chamberlain worked there as a bellhop while he was in high school, and boxers Muhammad Ali, Floyd Patterson, and Leon Spinks all trained there. Wilt Chamberlain was in high school when this picture was taken. He kept growing all the way into his early 20s. All-inclusive vacations at Grossinger's included not only 3 full meals a day and snacks at night, but all activities and sports, such as golf, tennis, a full health club and sauna, indoor and outdoor pools, and various kids and teen programs as well. And then in nearby Loch Sheldrake, there was the Browns Hotel and Country Club, one of the area's most family-friendly signature hotels. Because it did not have a golf course like Kuchar's, it concentrated its efforts on offering an outstanding swimming pool, the finest food, and the most sparkly entertainment to entice vacationers. However, Celebrity guests were also brought in there to make the hotel more exciting. And these included Jane Mansfield and boxing champion Jack Dempsey. But although the hotel attracted celebrities, it turned out that Italian and Jewish gangsters also frequented the area around Brown's as well. In the early 1950s, the bodies of their numerous victims turned up in Loch Sheldrake, less than 2 miles east of the hotel. By the end of the decade, fortunately, the gangsters had shifted their focus to Las Vegas and Cuba, so it is said. There was no such excitement at the Nevele Grand Hotel, the modern high-rise nearby, but there was plenty of beauty. Nevele, as you may know, is 11 spelled backwards. Why? Well, according to lore, it was named after the 11 19th century school teachers who discovered a waterfall on his property. Though another story says that the owners, Charles Slutsky and his wife, wanted 11 children, and when they failed to produce more than 5, they opened the hotel. But who really knows? According to, buildings and the Nevele resort property were connected by underground tunnels, so guests wouldn't have to go out in the rain. The central building, the Nevele Tower, built near the Waikiki Pool, was nearly circular and was designed to counter the excessive corridor lengths that plagued the more traditional Catskill hotels. Former President Lyndon B. Johnson stayed there when he was in town in 1966 to dedicate a new hospital in nearby Ellenville, and he took in a show at the spectacular Stardust Lounge at the Nevele Hotel. So several of these magnificent resorts ultimately decided to build on their summer success and stay open throughout the year, offering indoor hot tubs and saunas, covered ice rinks, man-made snow, gentle ski slopes, and even instruction. The festivities were particularly bright at Passover, one of the most expensive times of the year for a weekend getaway, but complete with lavish seders and plenty of good fellowship. Some say that many courtships began there that led to happy and lasting marriages. And yet, with all the glitz and glamour engendered by these magnificent resorts, even with the gorgeous golf courses designed by the famous Robert Trent Jones, the heated swimming pools, the top-tier performers who came right off the stage of the Ed Sullivan Show, with all the full-page ads in the Sunday travel sections of the New York Times, nothing, it seemed, could stop the decline of the popularity of the resorts, the hotels, and the bungalows in the early 70s. The golden age of the Catskills had begun to tarnish. Vacationers simply stopped coming. As the golden resorts and the warm, homey bungalows hosted fewer and fewer guests each summer, some of the resorts were forced to close one by one. The hotels were shuttered, and the bungalows and the kuchalaynes were shut down. But why exactly did the Jews abandon Sullivan County? So what accounted for the decline? The reasons are many, but there is one that overrode all the rest. Once again, anti-Semitism, which had played a critical role in the development of the Borscht Belt and its success in the first place, now played, surprisingly, a critical role in its demise. Anti-Semitism declined. And as the world opened up for Jews, and they could now go elsewhere on vacation, the decline in anti-Semitism had an oversized negative impact on tourism in the Catskill region. Alan Dershowitz, lawyer and retired Harvard professor, once famously said, to the consternation of many, "A little anti-Semitism is good for the Jews. It keeps them together." Airline fares dropped, and making faraway places accessible. And vacationers could now go to the Caribbean, to Hawaii and London for not that much more than going to the Catskills. When civil rights legislation in the 60s outlawed discrimination at places of public accommodation, the world was suddenly even more open to Americanized Jews. One Borscht Belt hotel owner lamented, "I used to compete with the hotel down the road. Now I compete with the world." It was an uneven battle, and the world won. But lifestyles changed too, and prosperity brought new and expanded choices. Air conditioning became available, allowing middle-class New Yorkers to make their hot box apartment livable, even comfortable, all summer long. People who had flocked to the Catskills to escape the stifling heat could now stay home in the summer and be comfortable. The allure of live entertainment in the Catskills so much a part of the experience of being there, was replaced by TV. The children of the 50s and 60s and 70s no longer wanted to vacation with their parents. Jewish young adults found they could meet each other more easily in the city. And the list goes on. Parents retired and moved to Boca Raton or Scottsdale. Holocaust survivors became American citizens and visited each other in California, New England, and the Rockies. Many kids in the next generation had no interest in vacationing in the same places they had been brought to as children. Assimilation spiked, intermarriage became common, and the Gentile spouses didn't necessarily want to go to the Jewish hotels. By the late 60s, the glory days were winding down. And as the 1980s approached, the entire region had become a shadow of itself, a mere shell. The hotels and the resorts limped along into the mid-80s, but bankruptcy ultimately claimed most of them. By the mid-90s, only 10 of the 926 hotels and resorts that had flourished in Sullivan, Ulster, and Orange counties still remained. Over the years since then, various developers have tried to revive the area, and some of the old bungalow colonies have been turned into enclaves catering to the ultra-Orthodox, successfully offering them the privacy and the separation they desire. But none of the other revivals took at all. They all failed. And as we all know, the Borscht Belt of legend is no more, though the dream of what was once lives on. The Catskills left an indelible mark on Jewish life and popular American culture by creating a place where families could bond together, where they could look to the heavens and wish for a successful future. It nurtured Holocaust survivors who needed to replace the sad songs and the dark tragedies of the war years with lighthearted music and fun. And it supported Jewish entertainment and new concepts of vacation pleasure. And the slice of Jewish history that made up the Borscht Belt that survives most indelibly today in the special brand of comedy derived from the performers there that prevails all over the world today and impacts us all. So let's listen to the words of Stephen Kampfer. He's an American journalist who spent years studying that special time and place. It may be impossible to fully understand the unique alchemy that gave rise to the Borscht Belt experience. What the Catskills were will never be again. It could only have existed when and where it did. But whether or not you were fortunate enough to experience it firsthand, its legacy touches and enriches us all. So thank you for being such an attentive audience, and I'll be happy to try to answer any of your questions.
Thanks very much, Linda. That was super. And there's obviously so much information and so much material about this history, and it resonates so much with people. I've been seeing in the chats and comments people have been giving throughout your talk about their own experiences. So this is super. I do want to encourage people to pose their questions in the Q&A window. And then I see some people have already posed them. So let me pass a few on to you right now, Linda.
Okay.
Some people have been asking questions again about the kind of forces that led to the creation of the Borscht Belt. And I know you ran through a few, but a few other people or topics are coming up. One is wondering if concerns about TB or diseases in the Lower East Side or in urban cities, urban centers, was one reason why people were trying to get out, if there was a disease component to this. Perhaps that's what's on our mind these days.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
And also about whether if the kind of look of the Catskills was particularly comforting to European immigrants because it looked similar. Was that any way part of why the Borscht Belt developed?
Yes, both of those actually do have some part in why the Borscht Belt developed such popularity. The mountains, the Catskill Mountains, do look somewhat like some of the mountains in Europe, thus the name the Jewish Alps. And so there were people from Europe who liked going there because of the sense of comfort and familiarity. And the disease component was something that I came across only very rarely. People probably were concerned with disease, but had so many other problems that I think it fell into the background. There were so many economic problems and socialization problems at the time. And the TB was a small part, a very small part.
Some other people are raising questions about how much did people know about the anti-Semitism? Were there people who were visiting the Borscht Belt who just knew their families went there, or how aware were they that that anti-Semitism might have been keeping their families out of other areas?
Oh, they were very aware. Anti-Semitism was so institutionalized and so common that people talked to each other about it quite a bit, and it did keep them out of other areas. And so they did develop this one area that they knew they could go to that really made it a huge difference in their lives.
Some people are also asking about what you came to at the end of your talk, and that's the end of the Borscht Belt, and asking about which was the last hotel, or which were the last hotels to close, if you know that, and what's left now. If people go up to Sullivan County or Ulster County, what can they find?
Well, they find a lot of wreckage, sadly. It's tragic. The hotels that went bankrupt mostly left everything there, and people came and vandalized them, and because they ran out of money, they couldn't sell or revive the area. They just left wreckage, and there's a book that was written about this with photographs. It's very depressing. So on the other hand, there are the bungalow colonies that have been taken over by the Hasidim, and they are thriving, but they're all behind walls, so you can't see much. There are people living in Monticello and Ellenville, and who have their regular lives there, just as we have here on Long Island. But in terms of hotels, there's very little there. There are a few guest houses that are left.
Your photograph of Wilt Chamberlain and some of the other athletes that you mentioned also inspired some questions, and particularly about whether there were other reasons. Was Wilt Chamberlain there to park cars, or were there basketball teams that he was playing on? Was the kind of competitive sports that was also going on? Some people are asking about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was in high school, so he wasn't doing anything professionally yet, but of course people had their eye on him, and he was playing basketball there in local teams. And of course he was teaching people, and he gave kind of little performances of his skills while he was there. It was a big draw to bring athletes and celebrities into the hotels. People liked coming for that reason.
A lot of people are also mentioning about the jobs that they had during the summers, and the money that they earned being so important to pay for college and things like that. Did you come across that when you were doing your research?
Oh, I did. I came across it in books that I read and websites and articles, but I also came across it in speaking to people from the Holocaust Center who were kind enough to share their stories with me, and also acquaintances and colleagues. So yes, a lot of people worked there as waiters or waitresses, a lot of kitchen staff, a lot of day camp counselors, a lot of good memories.
There are also some questions about your research and where you were able to come up with these super photographs that you included in your presentation, and how you dug up this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, research is just, it's a very natural part of my life. And so I used the library, and I did a lot of internet research, and because it's an interest of mine, I have several books of my own, and because I know people who ran hotels, who are a generation beyond me who ran hotels when they were able to do so, I had a lot of people to speak to. There are quite a few books. I'd be happy to pass them on to you if you want to send them out to people. And there are the Facebook groups that people can join. My Catskill Bungalow Colony Memories is on Facebook, and a couple of others. Particularly bungalow colonies. That seems to be where people spent the whole summer and really got to know each other.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Linda, for making this presentation, and to let everybody know, we will send around a link to a recording of this talk so you can share it with others who weren't able to make it. And maybe we'll include some of those sources from Dr. Burghardt.
Okay, sure.
Very much, and I wish you all a wonderful day, and hope that you enjoyed the program.
Good, good. Thank you. I did. I enjoyed presenting it. I hope people liked watching it. Thank you, Thorin.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.